And the other thing is early wins. Chances are in every community, you have a network of providers that's already working around one of these outcomes. Chances are. There's something already going on. They may not have access to the data that they need, so one early win could be getting them access to data that they've never been able to get. That's a huge win. But if you can begin to empower a group like that, you can get an early win and start to see results much faster. For us, that was an early childhood. It was already grouped together, they just didn't have access to the data. The role of the backbone organization was to get them access to the data. Right? That's what we were able to do.
So if a funder wanted to invest in, say, third grade reading, on helping that, do you also have some type of a process for recommending the programs and the outcomes and the measurements of those? Is that available?
Yeah, that's
that to me would be critical.
That's a role the backbone can play. And so I was actually in one of the cities that's talking with us right now. It's a hedge fund manager that is starting the conversation. And I had never been to a hedge fund manager's office, right? This was fascinating to me, right? I walked into his office, and it was totally nondescript. You would have never known what was going on. But behind those closed doors were about 100 people that were younger than me, who were all just looking at numbers and analyzing stuff. And then throughout the meeting we were having, he had like 30 key leaders in the room. Throughout the meeting, these people were walking in and handing him little pieces of paper, right? And then walking out. And then he'd look at it, and then he'd either do something on his phone, or he'd just throw it away. And finally I said, what is that? What is going on right there, right? And he said, oh, they're just showing me some numbers that they think might be useful for some of our work, right, in investing. And I said, that's actually a pretty darn good analogy for eventually where we'd like to get to here, right? If we were being really disciplined, we would be using data in such a thoughtful and purposeful way that the backbone organization could actually pull together the funders, not by themselves, but even with the programs. So the programs could say, look, this is what we've got for you to invest in, and we have the data to say it works. That would be the ideal thing. So ideally, you get the backbone empowered with that data to inform the funders. But one of our big mistakes with funders was we said just put it into a pool, right? A central pool. As I can tell, you're a funder.
Yes, sir.
That would not work with you.
No.
But what did work for us was when we started saying, what are these outcomes do you care about? And the funder would say, I care about these two. And then we'd start convening the funders around those two outcomes, and they like that. Because then they could get more information. You know what I mean? So it was
positively, the data would be talking to the funder.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's hand over here.
Oh, yes. Speaking of the donors, can you talk a little bit about how you overcame the challenge of bringing many donors together who probably have different initiatives and different ideas of the best way to accomplish these outcomes, and kind of overcame the obstacle through like communication and a product? I'm sure they want to see outcomes and numbers even before you get started.
We're out of time, so
That's awesome.
Great.
So I'll see you after.
Yeah, no. Great question. The number one thing we learned is that the best person to talk to a funder is another funder. Okay, so that was one thing. So we had a few major funders that had completely engaged in this process. The United Way, the Community Foundation, a couple of corporations, one family foundation. What we quickly started to learn is that if they were convening their peers, even without us in the room initially, right, not even there, around the outcome that they cared about, they could begin to tell us what were the things that we needed to be paying attention to as we worked with these conveners and the networks. That was critical. That was fundamentally critical for us to learn that lesson. And then eventually, the funders themselves decided that they wanted to start coming together. And that's when we started to have really productive meetings, right? And so I think that opening nugget was probably one of our biggest. We actually have something called the Funder Engagement Continuum, where we now communities lay out for funders. They say there's 4 ways you can get engaged, right? One is you can just say you'll pick up the phone when we've got an action plan, right? And that's actually pretty good. We used to think that was a total loss. That's actually great, now that I think about it, right? The second thing was a funder like Duke Energy in our community put on their application, are you a member of one of the Strive networks related to education? They made that a criteria for getting money. That was crazy, right? The day they did that, my phone rang off the hook, right? The next thing that funders could do is say, I'll put aside $100,000, right? And I'm not going to say I'm going to invest it in your plan, but when you call me and bring me a plan, I'll at least have some money put aside that I can decide if I want to invest it or not. Outstanding. right? And the last thing could be, I care about third grade reading, I'll pool my funds with 4 other funders, right? I'll do that. I want to do that. That's great. But all of these are different ways to get involved beyond funding the backbone to try to drive action. And when you lay it out that way, I think funders can see themselves in that a little bit more. And it may be that they just, they say, I'll just pick up the phone for now. But down the line, we'll see. One more question, and then we're unfortunately out of time.
How do you convince people, funders to fund the backbone?
That's a really tough sell. I'm just going to be blunt, right? Bob, and I'm sure others could tell you that that's a tough sell, and it takes a unique funder to say, I want to do that. One thing I'll say is we strongly, strongly recommend that local funders fund the backbone, right? So a lot of people want the national funder to come in and save the day. Strongly recommend that you do everything you can. Maybe like one of the things we've had is a big funder come in and say, we'll put $100,000 in if you can get $400,000 to put against it. Great. But our sense is that it's a lot harder to sustain the backbone if you have national funding, right? But the keys to stress are, number one, we're going to get you better data than you've ever had in your life, right? We're going to get you better data than you've ever had in your life if you are willing to put this in. Number two, if you care about college completion, would you be willing to put in $20,000 towards the backbone, right? So you can start to add up money when you start thinking about all the different pieces of the puzzle, right? And that's something that in Cincinnati they ended up doing that's helped a ton to raise money. And the last piece, quite frankly, is we haven't had a backbone forever, and look at our results. Could we, for 3 years, try something new? For 3 years, just give me 3 years, and that's what we really say you need. You need to get funding for that backbone in place for 3 years, and our bet is that we can show results. So that would be the big thing. Yeah.
Just a follow-up to that.
Sure.
What are the pros and cons of a wealthy individual funding the backbone? As their investment to the community.
Well, the pros is that they're funding the backbone.
Right.
The cons would be, number one, is that if they were funding something else before, people are going to throw rocks at you for taking money that was going directly to programming, right? So you've got to be really careful about that. And we actually encourage communities to try to get 4 or 5 sources so that you don't get blamed for that problem. I would say another challenge with that could be that person gets bored. So what level of security do you have that individual is not going to get distracted and want to go in a different direction? So diversifying your funding streams for this is important, but quite frankly, I think anybody that's run a backbone, if they got a call from a wealthy individual that said, you know what, I'll fund that. Chances are you should say, awesome. Yeah.
I did want to also highlight one of the things you mentioned earlier, and that is the issue of early wins. When you are talking about the data, you also have to identify some early wins that create that sense of momentum for both the funder and the network.
Yeah.
That's really, really a critical piece to sustaining it over time.
So, exactly, and my last comment will be this, and then I'll hand it back to George, because everybody's ready to go drink. Is that what's next? No. Networking is next. No, my one last comment, I'm looking forward to drinking now, let me just own that. No, my last comment would be this: those early wins are absolutely critical, but I do think that what Amy said in there was really relevant to you all, is that Texas has a lot of the pieces of the puzzle in place. In fact, if she compared you to other states around the country, you'd be very proud of yourselves. And you can go look at a report card. It's awesome. You've got this data. You've got lots of the pieces of the puzzle in place. And what she didn't talk about as much today, and that sometimes she hits home on, is that in the end, this is going to come down to leadership. It's not going to be anything other than that. It's going to be whether or not Educate Texas, working in partnership with many of you in this room, can actually take those pieces that Amy highlighted that you have in place, like great data systems, all these different pieces, is if somebody's going to stand up and say, we're going to navigate these privacy issues, right? We're going to get through that. Or we're going to get through all these, we're going to give you access to data that we never would have given you access to before, right? And we're going to put in airtight agreements on privacy, but we're going to get these things in place. But it's going to take that. And we're really impressed with the infrastructure that you have in place here. And I think, you can move from collaboration to collective impact. I have no doubt about that. There's only 2 other states. If you want the era of competition, Ohio and New York are right on your heels. So you better get with it, because you don't want Ohio or New York to beat you, do you? In Texas? No. All right, good. All right, thank you, everybody.
Everybody, so one of the things that we're looking forward to is building on the success that I know Bob and Hannah have been developing in both Houston and Austin with efforts that we're helping to support both in Dallas with a regional collaboration called Commit that's being led by Todd Williams and is being championed by the mayor of Dallas. And then with the support of FSG, we have helped to convene the leadership teams from higher ed institutions and school districts to help build out this civic infrastructure and the backbone to help align where those different organizations want to go across this continuum. And so our desire is to continue to help accelerate and support the success that many of these different regions are expressing, and we know that there are a dozen more that have emerged over the last year, and we want to be able to help provide the kinds of resources and supports that enable this community of practice to help Texas accelerate the success of our students across the state. And so over the next few months, we'll highlight a lot of the different initiatives that we'll be teeing up, in addition to the work that's happening in Dallas, the Rio Grande Valley, Houston, and Austin. And so that's one of the areas that we hope to come back to you all to share the progress and success that we start to see. Thank you all. We're now adjourned to do some networking, and then we'll be at the bar.